Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is how we are often misled by the pundits. In this case, misled about Iran. If you rely on pundits for information about foreign affairs, you are probably under the impression, the misimpression, that the entire Middle East is a tinderbox about to explode. You are probably convinced that the United States is on the brink of war with Iran, and you are probably trembling when you're thinking about the repercussions that will befall the United States when there is a retaliatory strike against Iran. I don't have a crystal ball, but neither do the pundits. And I'm here to tell you to take a deep breath and simply relax. It's not so clear that chaos and catastrophe are in our immediate future. And if there is a counterstrike by Iran, a possibility, not a probability, it will not directly involve the United States and Iran. It will involve Israel, aka the United States ally, and Hezbollah, aka Iran's proxy. You might take some small comfort in knowing that the Arabic press is as full of speculation as the Western press. Hezbollah's number 2 is Sheikh Naim Qassem. His official title is Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah, and he has been representing the organization and getting a lot of press of late. In an interview that Sheikh Qassem gave to the Lebanese daily Jamhuriya, reported by Reuters, he said that, quote, and here's the quote exactly, "At the regional level, we see as unlikely an American war against Iran for many reasons. The most important of them being, firstly, that Iran is a strong state with important defensive capabilities." The Deputy Secretary General went on to explain that President Trump would not be able to control the outcome of such a war. Why? Because, as Qassem intimated, there are too many Iranian proxies with the ability of attacking the many interests the United States has in the region. He said that the United States President, and here I'm quoting again, does not benefit from a war that he can start, but whose results he cannot control, and which might begin with Iran, but may be accompanied by the region being set on fire. For his part, President Donald J. Trump has indicated that should there be a war between the United States and Iran, it would be over very quickly. Again, a possibility, by no means a probability. Hezbollah was created by Iran in 1982 by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. There is no doubt that if any serious conflict erupted between the United States and Iran, Hezbollah would be best poised to attack Israel. They are positioned on Israel's northern border and have accumulated over 100,000, some say 300,000, rockets and missiles. Most importantly, over these past few years and many regional conflicts, Hezbollah has amassed extensive experience fighting in Syria and defending the Assad regime. They are not a ragtag band of zealots. They are now polished, trained, experienced soldiers. Hezbollah's prowess, all of it, comes courtesy of Iran. Iran sponsored and trained them. Iran provided them with arms and weapons. Iran gave them rockets on the condition that they be used only and exclusively against Israel and only after Tehran issues the launch order. Bluntly put, Hezbollah exists because of Iran. Hezbollah is indebted to Iran, and Iran calls in their debts. By Qassem's own admission, Iran has created a great alliance across the Middle East. He takes pride in speaking about, quote, the great accomplishments, unquote, of the alliance led by Iran over the past 2 decades in, quote, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and elsewhere, unquote. These comments by Hezbollah's number 2 do not fit the classic rhetoric that permeates the Middle East. Other leaders tend to bluster and make grandiose statements about the power of Islam and the invincibility of Islam. They speak of how believers, in other words Muslims, will defeat the non-believers, meaning you and me and everyone else. More typically, Hezbollah's statements announce that the Saudi royal family has become servants to Israel, or that Hezbollah rockets can hit every square inch of Israel. Over the past few years, the comments made by Sheikh Qassem have become very useful tools for Westerners. They help us interpret and assess the tone of the region. These most recent comments indicate, thankfully, a level-headed response to the rising tensions between Iran and the United States. Qassem, quite literally, lays out a sequence of events. Iran hits the United States' interests. The United States responds with a surgical strike and against Iran and Iranian targets responsible for the hit, and then Iranian proxies attack Israel or other U.S. interests. Measured and controlled responses. Not the best case scenario, but certainly a far cry from war. The next thing I've been thinking about is Gaza and whether or not there is a resolution for the Gaza issue. This is uncomfortable to say, and it is certainly not what most people want to hear. But here it is. There is no simple, easy solution for dealing with Gaza. There is no simple short-term solution, and right now there is no long-term solution at all. Carpet bomb Gaza, or the variation on that theme, like turn Gaza into a parking lot. These are the two most often repeated, highly unrealistic mantras of pro-Israeli masses across the world. I think people give voice to these phrases as a coping mechanism rather than as a real suggestion. Anyone who knows anything about Israel knows that neither of these are actually viable suggestions. They know certainly by this point that Israel will not indiscriminately bomb Gaza. What Israel will do, what Israel has been doing, is attacking military sites and targeting military leaders in Gaza. Only those locations and only those people. And the result of that humanitarian decision, a decision that does not involve the irresponsible massive killing of innocents, maintains the status quo. Sometimes the status quo is maintained for a shorter period of time, other times a longer period. But always and inevitably, a new crisis erupts and the routine is played out once again. Reinvading Gaza, reoccupying Gaza, is not going to happen. Not even in the realm of possibilities. No way. We all know the pattern. Either Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad launches rockets into Israel. That breaks the threshold of Israel's tolerance. Israel counters with a series of attacks targeting arms depots and command and control centers. If the situation becomes more intense, Israel attempts to target Hamas leadership. Targeting, of course, is a military euphemism for assassinating. IDF leadership has further plans. Those plans include targeting, kidnapping Hamas senior leadership. They also include targeting and kidnapping and arresting mid-level Hamas leadership. The senior leadership of Hamas is in hiding, so it's easier to attack mid-level leaders who are not scared enough to go into hiding itself, but who are informed and involved enough to provide Israel with the vital intelligence and send shockwaves through the ranks. The plans also include heavier bombing as another way of sending a strong message to Hamas. When Israel strikes Hamas targets, the targets are usually obvious and almost always deserted. All Hamas personnel have long since evacuated and burrowed themselves deep into underground bunkers. In hopes of not injuring innocents, Israel often alerts Gazans to where the IDF is going to strike, affording them the time to find safer places to hide. This being a political season, politicians are decrying Israel's actions, calling them minimal and self-defeating. But the reality is, if those same people were prime minister right now, they would be doing exactly the same thing. Politicians and prime minister wannabes are quick to vociferously criticize, but when in position, a different set of priorities, considerations, and criteria snap into place. Reserved restraint and surgical force is what is needed. Israel is not taking the easy way out. They're taking the smart way in. Israel is knocking out Hamas's ability to send messages and to launch rockets. Israeli strikes aimed at weapons, factories, depots, launch areas, vehicles, and motor pools cripples Hamas and throws them off course. It might not be a banner headline response, but Israel is seriously putting a dent and causing chaos in the infrastructure of Hamas. Israel's response to rockets from Hamas has been very disciplined. Iran and Hamas did not expect a disciplined response. They miscalculated. Iran and Hamas were hoping that rockets shot into central Israel would have stimulated an aggressive Israeli response. They were hoping that Israel's response would cause the deaths of many innocent Palestinians. In the warped world in which they exist, the deaths of innocent Palestinians would have been a huge success for Hamas and Iran. It would have awakened the world via the Western media to what is happening. But rather than seeing rockets launched from Gaza flying into Israel, the media would have told the story of Israel killing innocents. Israel did not let that happen. Instead, Israel acted maturely, with restraint. Kudos to Israel. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is an editorial from the New York Times. It's dated June 28th online and July 1st in print. The title is almost exactly the same in both iterations. It's entitled Jared Kushner's Middle East Development Project, subtitled His Conference in Bahrain Hears of Big Dream Plans Divorced from Reality. By the editorial board, the online edition adds the same parenthetical warning that I add whenever I show you an editorial. It reads, the editorial board represents the opinions of the board, its editor and the publisher. It is separate from the newsroom and the op-ed section. The New York Times lends its voice to the many who say that the Bahrain workshop was worthless. This is how they begin. The slick promotional publication titled Peace to Prosperity described a $50 billion investment surge in the Palestinian economy over the next decade. Like a fantastical New York real estate promotion, Palestinians certainly could use the investment and jobs in their economically depressed communities, where unemployment last year was 31%. The publication touted what was supposed to be an economic foundation for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, presented at a conference in Bahrain this week by Jared Kushner, presidential son-in-law, senior advisor, and formerly New York real estate developer. The New York Times thinks that the meeting projected no new proposals, just a patronizing tone. The editors continue. Mr. Kushner invited participants to imagine a new reality in the Middle East. But except for its patronizing tone, there is little new about the plan, which relies heavily on the construction of much-needed infrastructure projects that are retreads of proposals the World Bank, the United States, and others made in the previous failed peace efforts. The most ambitious undertaking would be a $5 billion transportation corridor from the West Bank to Gaza that could link the two Palestinian territories with a major road and possibly a modern rail line to facilitate the flow of Palestinian people and goods with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and other countries in the region. Facilities at key border crossings would be upgraded. New cargo terminals would be built. Old ones would be refurbished, and new security technology would be installed. The New York Times editors conclude by writing that Kushner is right that old methods have failed, but one still must address the political aspirations of the Palestinians. This is how they conclude. The one truly enthusiastic cadre appeared to be billionaire investors who, seemingly, for the first time were seeing economic potential in a long-ignored part of the world. Many of them expressed such eagerness about eventually underwriting projects promoted by the plan that Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said, quote, it's going to be like a hot IPO, unquote. Mr. Kushner is right when he says the old way hasn't really worked. However, by presenting a plan that ignores Palestinians' aspirations for statehood and their demands for ending Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, he is making success even less likely. If we are going to fail, he has said, we don't want to fail doing it the same way it has been done in the past. What happens next is anybody's guess. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, admitted in a recent closed-door meeting with Jewish leaders that the plan may be unexecutable. But if Mr. Kushner can mobilize powerful investors and international businesses as cheerleaders for the Middle East peace, he could make a real contribution. Second up is a column by Gidon Ben-Zvi, and it was published in Newsmax on Thursday, June 27, 2019. Newsmax is one of the most important websites online. It has some of the best columnists writing and engaging in very serious discussions about politics. This site has a huge impact and has a TV component also. Bill O'Reilly has his show on Newsmax now. Disclaimer, I am a weekly columnist for Newsmax. This column is called Do Tolerance Museums Really Fight Anti-Semitism? This is how Ben-Zvi begins. The monumental $250 million building for the Museum of Tolerance, Jerusalem, is scheduled to open sometime in 2020. Spread out over 180,000 square feet, the Museum of Tolerance will house 2 permanent exhibition spaces, a conference center, a theater, an educational facility, a restaurant, and a book and gift shop. This latest and greatest Tolerance Museum will focus on global anti-Semitism, extremism, hate, human dignity, and responsibility. The Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem's goal to promote unity and respect among Jews and people of all faiths is noble. Now, the author explains why the entire project is misguided. He writes, "But how effective will it be in combating a new strain of anti-Semitism that's cloaked in opposition to Zionism and criticism of the government policies? The desire to ensure that nothing like the Holocaust ever occurs again anywhere hasn't beaten back the rising tide of anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States. Another museum of tolerance will do little more than preach sweet-sounding homilies on morality, pluralism, broad-mindedness, and tolerance to people who already embrace such values." Ben Tzvi then asks a serious question. What is the impact of such a museum? He continues, how many of these organizations that are dedicated to the advancement of Holocaust education, remembrance, and research have transformed the jihadi fighter into a rational humanist? What's their success rate in reaching out to re-educating members of the Ku Klux Klan? Have you ever read a story about a man planning to open fire on a synagogue full of worshipers who had a change of heart after walking into the local Tolerance Museum? And now Ben Tzvi's conclusions. Tolerance Museum? Great idea. How's about expanding the franchise to cities that could use such enlightenment? Damascus, Mecca, Mogadishu, Pyongyang, and Tehran are a few bastions of evil that come to mind. Jerusalem needs a Tolerance Museum about as much as it needs another falafel stand. I understand the point Ben Tzvi is making, but I think he is taking it to the extreme. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. We're going to talk about two cartoons today. The first cartoon is by Michael Ramirez. We've seen him quite a bit, and was published on June 23rd, 2019. The cartoon is drawn in the context of the rising conflict between Iran and the United States. It's entitled Playing with Fire. The Grand Ayatollah has a lit candle in his hand. A U.S. firefighter is holding a huge fire hose and says, "Ahem." The essential point here is that Iran is starting up with and playing with the United States, not realizing just how dangerous the game can become. In essence, they're playing with fire. The next cartoon is drawn by Pat Begley and was published on June 27, 2019. The cartoon depicts Jared Kushner with a large turkey. The turkey is labeled Kushner Peace Plan. As we know, turkeys cannot fly, but the turkey is flapping and flapping its wings, trying really hard to fly. The artist is telling us that the Kushner Plan will not work. It will never get off the ground, like the turkey. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel once again proved itself to be a wonderful democracy. The largest investment bank in Israel, Bank Leumi, just named an Israeli Arab as their new chairman of the board. Dr. Samer Haj Yehia was selected by the bank's board of governors. Haj Yehia earned a PhD in macroeconomics from MIT. He earned an MBA, an MA in finance, a master's degree in accounting and economics, and a law degree. His resume is very impressive. As the new chairman of the board, I am certain that the bank will continue to grow financially. The most important lesson here is that this election was not a token appointment. Haj Yehia is the perfect candidate for the position. Israel is a democracy with equal opportunity. Like in any democracy, there are some very vocal racists. Unfortunately, that minority, although tiny, attracts the limelight. These racists often catch the attention of the media, and they are paraded across the headlines, but they do not represent Israel. More typical of Israel is this appointment. The Israeli intel satellite company ImageSat International released pictures of Russia's 4 S-300 surface-to-air anti-missile batteries in Syria. The fourth and final S-300 photographs were made public recently. This information means that it would be much harder for Israel to attack Iranian and Hezbollah targets in Syria. This Russian S-300 is one of the newest and most sophisticated anti-missile systems and will most probably be manned by Iranians. The 4 batteries are positioned strategically throughout Syria and will significantly bolster the defense against Israelis and their airstrikes. With the S-300 protecting them, Israel will have to work much harder to keep Iran and Hezbollah from amassing weapons and transferring them from place to place. This is a major obstacle for Israel to overcome. 15 Palestinians attended the Bahrain conference. 15. And when it was over, the Palestinian police raided their homes to arrest all 15 of them. The Palestinian police confiscated computers, security cameras, but only one person was arrested. Why? Because the others escaped and went into hiding before their homes were raided. Hebron businessman Salah Abu Mayaleh was the person arrested. He spent 2 days in jail and was released after the United States Embassy sent a very strong letter to the PA. Jason Greenblatt, White House Special Envoy, tweeted a response after Abu Mayaleh's release. He tweeted, "We are pleased the PA has released the Palestinian they arrested after attending the Peace to Prosperity workshop. We look forward to continuing our conversation with all who attended the workshop and anyone else who wants a better future for the Palestinians," unquote. Before the Peace to Prosperity conference, the Palestinian press published the names and pictures of those planning to attend the workshop and called them all traitors. The charge against them was treason. Talk about an extreme reaction. The workshop in Bahrain is over, but not forgotten. Palestinians are calling it a big nothing. The United States is optimistic. After all, it's the first stage in the deal of the century. Interestingly, there was a very little coverage of the Bahrain workshop in mainstream U.S. media, and also there was very little even in the Israeli media. Actually, the most covered items in Israel, in the news cycle in Israel itself at that time, at the time of the workshop was taking place, were the United States presidential debates and the Iranian threat, not at all the workshop. On the whole, there was more media coverage to lead up to the workshop than there was of the workshop itself. One can never really predict how a news cycle will develop. In many ways, modest coverage is actually helpful. But then again, it proves the point for the Palestinians. Bahrain was in the media, but only on the sidelines. Russia announced that they have information that the U.S. drone that was shot down by Iran in June was flying over Iranian airspace. Nikolai Patrushev, the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, made it clear that their information indicates that the United States encroached on Iranian airspace, and hence, Iran was justified in shooting down the U.S. drone. He followed up and said that the pictures, video, and information that the U.S. provided to dispute the claim that it was occupying Iranian airspace were fuzzy and very unprofessional, and therefore unconvincing. He clearly said that he does not believe the United States argument. This is a devastating statement by Russia. They are siding with Iran over the United States. The Russian statement also raised doubts about whether the United States is telling the truth. And that plays right into the Iranian playbook, which repeats constantly, over and over and over, that the United States has fabricated facts about Iran. The Russian response is much larger than a simple statement about a misguided drone. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that the names we choose to use are dependent on our language and our culture? Some names slide easily between them. Others do not. Biblical names are the perfect examples. The names are spelled differently and pronounced differently depending on the language of the Bible you are reading. Even if some names could easily make the shift from Hebrew to English, for example, a problem arises. The Bible historically transitioned several times. It went through Hebrew to Aramaic to Greek to Latin, then English. So Gaza, for example, a place that we've been talking about, its English name is Gaza. Its Hebrew name is Azza. Jerusalem is English. The Hebrew name for Jerusalem, everyone knows, of course, is Yerushalayim. Hebrew for Ruth is Rut. It's not just an arbitrary decision. There are some rules. When a name or a proper noun starts with the Hebrew letter Yud, the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Greek and Latin versions softened the sound, and the English turned it into a J. That's how Yosef in Hebrew becomes Joseph in English. All shins, the second to last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, lose the H and become a simple S. So Shimon becomes Simon, Shimshon, Samson. Shalom, in certain languages, becomes salam. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.